This morning we're going to talk about what the Bible has to say about moms and what God's pattern is. It is amazing, frankly, how our society has changed. It's amazing how our society's perception of a woman has changed, how the society's design for her role has changed. If you ever happen to be rummaging through any old magazines or old newspapers, kind you see in old bookstores and in your garage or your attic somewhere, and you look at the women that are portrayed in some of the ads in the past. You see mothers rocking babies and women in kitchens cooking dinner for families using some special product, or a woman sitting on a bed reading stories to her children. And pictures like that, images like that almost sound like fiction in our world today. When you look at the woman in advertising today, you see her dressed up in a slick business suit, swinging a briefcase as she sails down a crowded street. Or you see her in tights doing aerobics, or in a skimpy bathing suit half exposed. What is it that our society really views as the woman to be exalted, the woman to be honored? What does the excellent woman of the 90s really look like? What kind of woman is she? What is the modern superwoman? Well, I suppose if we created a composite, it might go a little like this. She works, builds her career, demands equal pay, refuses to submit to her husband demanding equality with him in everything, has an affair or two and a divorce or two, exercises her independence, relies on her own resources, doesn't want her husband or her children to threaten her personal goals, very often has her own bank account. She hires a maid or a cleaning service, eats out at least 50% of the time with her family or without, makes cold cereal and coffee the standard breakfast for everybody, quick frozen meals, the usual dinner fare, if there is a dinner fare at home, expects her husband to do at least an equal share of housework. She is tanned, coiffured, aerobicized, shopping to keep up the fashion trends, makes sure she can compete in the attention-getting contest. She puts the kids in a daycare center, makes sure each one has a TV in his room or a radio and a CD player so they are entertained all the time and don't bother her, leaving them to the brainwashing of the immoral materialistic society that pumps whatever it pumps through those media. She is opinionated, usually, likes to be heard from, and is eager to fulfill her personal goals. That's the kind of woman that the world applauds. She can't really stay married, can't stay happy, and her kids get into trouble and sometimes drugs and often become criminals. And she is far from the woman that God has called the excellent woman to be. What does God say a woman, a mother, is to be? Well, let's turn to Proverbs chapter 31, that time-honored, age-old portion of Scripture, and see what it has to say. Because herein is God's revelation of the excellent woman. Actually, it says in verse 10, an excellent wife. Here is the description. When it comes down to what a woman ought to be, this is it. Now, this is an ideal. This is a model. This doesn't describe some particular woman. This describes the ideal woman. There is a lot to be said about women in the book of Proverbs. As you know, the book of Proverbs is a list of proverbs or statements of wisdom. And throughout the book of Proverbs, there is a continual interest in women. There is a woman who appears frequently in the book of Proverbs, and she is the opposite of the excellent woman. She is the adulteress. She flatters with her lips. She forsakes the covenant with her own husband to seduce someone else. The adulteress has lips that drip honey. She has a smooth tongue, and she hunts for the precious life of some victim. There is not only the adulteress, but there is the noisy woman, the loud, boisterous woman with whom no one wants to live, and a normal man would prefer, the proverb says, to live in the corner of a roof in a tiny little place than in a big house with a boisterous woman. There is the foolish woman, there is the rebellious woman, there is the quarrelsome woman, and they are all really set in contrast to this excellent wife here in chapter 31. There is, in chapter 12, verse 4 of Proverbs, this statement, "An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who shames him is as rottenness in his bones." Nothing better than an excellent wife, nothing worse than the opposite. In fact, a wife has a tremendous ability to influence a husband and a family. In 1 Kings chapter 21, there is a statement made about Ahab, the wicked king. Perhaps as wicked as any king in all of the annals of the history of Israel. It says of Ahab that he was wicked because he was incited to it by his wife, Jezebel. We talk about the fact that God has designed men to be the head of the family, and that means provision, and that means protection, that means leadership. Men have that responsibility, but men do not have more than, and perhaps not as much as, women when it comes to influence. Ahab was the man of his house. He was even the king. He was a leader. He was strong, but his life was shaped by the influence of his wife. A wife plays that role in the life of her husband and the life of her children. So turning from the adulterous and the noisy woman and the foolish woman, the rebellious woman, the quarrelsome woman, the woman who incites her husband to do evil, we come in chapter 31 to the excellent wife. And here is laid out for us the pattern for that woman. Now, by the way, just to give you a little bit of background, you look at verse 1, it says, "The words of King Lemuel, the oracle or the speech or the burden which his mother taught him." Now, we don't know really anything about King Lemuel, but he had a good Jewish mother. And along with chicken soup and whatever else she provided for him, she gave him some really good advice. Because he was royal and because he was going to take a position of rulership, she told him some things he really needed to know. She said to him in verse 3, "Do not give your strength to women. Don't engage yourself in sexual liaisons with other women." In other words, don't commit fornication as a single man. Keep your life pure. Do not give away your strength to women. Those are the ways that destroy kings. She gave him some further good advice. Verse 4, don't drink. Don't drink wine, don't drink strong drink, because it clouds your judgment. She continued with this advice, and she says to him in verse 8, "Open your mouth for the dumb." In other words, speak for those people who can't speak for themselves, those people who are oppressed, those people who can't defend themselves, those people who are too small and insignificant to have a platform of self-defense. You take up their cause. You take up the rights of the unfortunate. In verse 9, she told him, "Open your mouth and judge righteously and defend the rights of the afflicted and the needy." This is great advice from this Jewish mother to her son. Stay away from alcohol. Stay away from sexual immorality. Take care of hurting people. Defend those who can't defend themselves. Stand for the oppressed. Support the needy and deal justly with everybody. This is how to be a good king. This is how to be a great man. And most of all, and this is what occupied the length of her speech from verse 10 to 31, find a good wife. Understanding the implications of a bad one. Boisterous, quarrelsome, self-centered, wicked, such as Jezebel, and realizing the influence she was bound to have upon his life, his mother encouraged Lemuel to find an excellent wife. The kind of woman she describes is the model ideal woman. She is priceless. An excellent wife, verse 10 says, "Who can find her worth is far above jewels." And she goes on to describe this woman both physically, mentally, morally, spiritually. In every dimension, the character of the excellent wife and mother is unfolded here. She describes this ideal woman, this model woman, by looking at 6 features. Her character as a wife, her devotion as a homemaker, her generosity as a neighbor, her influence as a teacher, her effectiveness as a mother, and her excellence as a saint. Now, this is really a very important document in Jewish history. Obviously, it is inspired by God, but inspired by God in a unique way that to you is not visible. And I'll tell you what that is. There are 22 verses from verse 10 to 31. And there are 22 characters in the Hebrew alphabet. Each of these verses begins with the next character in sequence in the Hebrew alphabet. So that it starts with Aleph, Beth, Gimel, and so forth, right down through the Hebrew alphabet. The first letter of each of these proverbs, each verse, is the next letter in sequence. Why? Because it was easy that way to memorize this. It became an acrostic which created a formula for easy memorization and recall of these features so that every young Jewish son could be taught by his mother to memorize Proverbs 31, 10 to 31, and thereby have in his mind the criteria at all times by which he was to measure the excellence of a woman. Unfortunately, we don't have that benefit in English. But it was a great benefit to them in Hebrew. This kind of woman, according to chapter 19, verse 14, is a gift from God. So it presupposes prayer, that one should find such a woman. In fact, it says in verse 10, an excellent wife, who can find? Who can find? Now, I just do want to be fair about this, because I don't want you to think this is just a problem for men to find such a woman. It is also a problem for women to find a good man. This is just a moment of equal time here. Chapter 20, verse 6, who can find a trustworthy man? So, gentlemen, let's not be too proud before we understand they have a similar problem. Too often, when a selection is made of a woman or a wife, it is made for the wrong reasons. Looks, education, personality, likes and dislikes, accomplishments, style, rather than virtue, character, those things that matter. But this woman has a value that is far above jewels. The word actually describes precious stones of any kind. Some versions translate it rubies, some translate it pearls. Jewels is the best. It's just a generic word for precious stones. The point being, this is a very, very valuable woman. Not easy to find. Then in verse 11, she begins to describe this woman. First of all, her character as a wife. Let's talk about that. Her character as a wife. Verse 11. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain for doing so. Now, in the ancient world, you need to understand this. In the ancient world, things were a bit different, even in Judaism. Women were not looked upon as God had designed them to be looked upon, but grew to be seen as sort of second class. And very often men built strong friendships with other men and maintained their wives only as servants. And in some cases, not even maintaining a particular devotion of intimacy to them, they had concubines for their intimate acts. And so wives could be kept at a distance and treated very often as servants. Consequently, there wasn't always the devotion between the two that created trust. And so we read in some ancient documents that it was somewhat common for husbands to lock up all their valuables when they went away so their wives didn't take them. I hope that's not the case in your home. But one of the first things that we read in this whole passage is that the husband doesn't have to lock anything up because he trusts his wife. And the trust is well-founded because she's not going to do anything to harm his personal gain. I suppose the equivalent today would be, are you willing, when you have to go out of town for the 2-week business trip to leave your checkbook with your wife? Or frankly, do you even have a choice? Or to leave all the credit cards and know that perfect calm that comes when you say, she will never violate anything. She will never do anything that brings harm. I completely trust in her. She will never threaten what I have gained for the support of this family. That's what it's talking about. It's talking about the fact that there is an intimate relationship built on complete trust. The husband can go to work, he can go away, he can do whatever he needs to do with absolute confidence of her integrity, her wisdom, and her discretion in the use of his assets and in the care of his interests. His comfort is her concern. His burdens are hers to relieve. He is at ease in absence because he knows that all he has is safe with her because she cares for him, and he knows that. And love means he would never do anything that would cause him sorrow or suffering or pain or distress. He's not suspicious. He's not worried. He's not jealous because she is absolutely trustworthy. That is a great foundation for a marriage. He will have no lack of gain. He's never going to have to become some kind of soldier of fortune and make back what she loses. He's never going to have to cheat to gain a little more to cover the losses that she's causing. He doesn't have to be tempted to steal or to falsify some account somewhere so that he can get back what she wasted carelessly. By the way, this indicates, and I think it's an important thing to mention, that she is in charge of the domestic matters. That she is in charge of using and accounting for the resources in the home. He is free to give himself to his work, knowing that she will be a steward of all of that. That's part of the oikos despotes when it says in 1 Timothy 5:14 that the woman is to be the ruler of the house, or in Titus chapter 2 that she's to be the ruler of the house. It's part of that is the management of those resources that the husband goes out to earn and to provide. She helps him to profit, not loss. He has enough because she is devoted to the care of his earnings, because she loves him, because she cares about him, because she seeks his good. And that's what comes in verse 12. Look at the next verse. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. This Jewish mother tells her son, you want a woman who always has your best interests in her heart, who always seeks to build you up, whose desire is to make you every bit of the man that you can be in every area. All the days of her life, she is devoted to the well-being of her husband. Good times, bad times, times of plenty, times of little, times of sadness, times of happiness, sick times, well times. Her love is ever and always devoted to the successes of her husband. She is concerned about the highest spiritual principles, and she never fluctuates. She seeks the very best and the noblest for the man who is her husband. She serves him as Sarah served Abraham, according to 1 Peter 3:6, and called him Lord. She was committed to him. She reveals her virtue by her consistent service on his behalf. Her love is so deep, it has a purity and a power and devotion that never changes. All her life long, his successes, his comfort, his reputation, his joy are her delight. To live for him is her constant happiness. And a footnote at this point. That means that when necessary, because his highest good is her greatest desire, she will confront his sin and his weakness. And lovingly, she will be a conscience. She will be necessarily the voice of God. Never unkind, always submissive, but eager to be sure that he walks with God. She is concerned to confront his sin and his failure. That's part of desiring him to be everything he should be. That, by the way, is the essence of what it says in Titus 2:4. When it tells the young women to love their husbands, that's what it means. It doesn't mean walk around gaga over the guy. It doesn't mean some kind of emotion. It means when you love somebody, you seek his best interest. You seek that he would be every bit the man that God would want him to be, that he would be as much as he could be spiritually, as much as he could be professionally, in every way. You seek that he would be the best father, the best friend, the best worker. And thus, this woman advances her husband's respect. Go down to verse 23. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. The point is, he is known as her husband. And his reputation is known far and wide. He's known by everybody. What happened was, inside the gates of ancient cities, there would be a sort of a platform area or a patio area where the elders of the city would gather every day, and they would adjudicate the matters that came up in the city, disputes, and it was like a sort of an open court where hearings were made with regard to the issues of the time and where business was carried out. And the elders of the city, the mature men of the city, sat in that place and rendered judgment. The point being that this man has a great reputation among the leaders of the city. It is a reputation basically built by his wife.